The Death Toll Rise. Title: The Death Toll Rise. Part 1. The Ghost of Tiago. Chapter 1. The Taste of Ash. The clang of the steel gate was the only ceremony Hazel received upon her release. No fanfare, no welcoming committee, just the chill wind of freedom, tasting suspiciously like ash and regret. 28 years old, and 4 of them had been swallowed whole by the concrete maw of Northwood Penitentiary. Her skin, once sun-kissed from days spent on the streets, now bore the pallor of recycled air and fluorescent lights. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, held a new, deeper chill, a frost that prison had etched into her soul. She clutched the worn duffel bag containing her meager possessions, a few threadbare clothes, a dog-eared paperback, and a laminated prison ID that was now obsolete. The world outside felt both alien and achingly familiar. The roar of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, the greasy smell of a hot dog stand, it all hit her at once, a sensory assault after years of muted existence. But it wasn't the noise or the smells that truly resonated. It was the name that echoed in her mind, a constant, grating hum beneath the surface of her thoughts: Tiago. The boy she was framed for killing. The boy whose innocent life was collateral damage in a gangland screw-up, and whose death had cemented her fate. She hailed a cab, giving an address in a forgotten corner of the city, a place where the shadows stretched long and the laws were written in blood, not on paper. This wasn't a journey home. It was a journey back to the war. Chapter 2. The Red Shooter's Betrayal. Her old apartment building was a relic, scarred with graffiti, its windows like vacant eyes. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the ghost of who she used to be. But the hidden compartment behind the loose brick in the bedroom wall was untouched. Her stash, years of calculated risk, of whispered deals, of the adrenaline rush of a successful heist, it was all there. Bundles of crisp $100 bills, meticulously vacuum-sealed. Enough to live comfortably, anonymously, for the rest of her days. But comfort wasn't on her mind. Anonymity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. The memory of the night Tiago died was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The Red Shooter gang, her former family, had been on a high-stakes drug deal gone sideways. Salvador, their enforcer, a man whose temper was as short as his fuse, had been high on something that made his eyes twitch like a cornered rat. They were supposed to hit a rival dealer, but Salvador, manic and paranoid, had opened fire on the wrong car. A blue sedan, not the black SUV they'd tracked. And in the passenger seat, a young boy, no older than 14, caught in the crossfire. Tiago, an innocent, gone in a flash of shattered glass and a sickening thud. Panic had seized the Red Shooters. Salvador, the actual killer, was too valuable, too volatile to lose. Larry, their leader, a man Hazel had once respected, had made the call. A quick, brutal decision. Hazel, known for her sharp mind and her ability to keep a secret, was the perfect scapegoat. They'd planted evidence, spun a story, and then, with chilling efficiency, tipped off the authorities. Hazel was responsible. She remembered the look in Larry's eyes as the police sirens grew louder. No remorse, just cold, calculated survival. She'd gone down, silent, stoic, clinging to a sliver of hope that one day, she would make them pay. That day was now. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. Hazel spent weeks moving through the underbelly of the city, not openly, but like a phantom. She visited old haunts, spoke in hushed tones, assessed the shifting allegiances and new faces. The Red Shooter was still a force, a spiderweb of influence stretching across the forgotten districts. Larry was still at the top. Salvador, surprisingly, was still alive and kicking, a testament to Larry's unwavering loyalty to his monstrous enforcer. Her money, a substantial sum from her past robberies and drug deals with the very gang she now intended to dismantle, was her greatest asset. It bought her silence, information, and, most importantly, loyalty. She found them one by one. First, Robin, A 24-year-old with a sniper's eye and a history of bad decisions. Robin had been in a rival crew, but unlike most, she had principles, or at least a code. She'd heard the whispers about Hazel's framing, seen the injustice. Hazel sensed a kindred spirit in her quiet intensity. Robin didn't ask for much, just a chance to prove herself. Then came the others. 8 men, 2 women in total, besides Hazel. A motley crew of ex-cons, disgruntled low-lifes, and soldiers of fortune. Men like Ghost, a silent giant who moved like smoke and hid like a train. Women like Viper, a street-smart hustler with a knack for explosives. They were all hardened, all hungry, and all willing to follow Hazel's cold fire for a hefty price. She laid out her plan, devoid of emotion. This isn't about territory or drugs, she told them, her voice a low rasp in the dimly lit warehouse she'd chosen as their temporary base. This is about justice. They took my life. We're going to take theirs, piece by bloody piece. No one flinched. They were the kind of people who understood. Part 2. The First Strike. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. The Red Shooters had a new hangout, a dilapidated pool hall on the edge of their territory, its neon sign perpetually flickering, casting a sickly green glow on the street. It was a well-known hub, a place of loud music, cheap booze, and constant chatter. A perfect hunting ground. Hazel's crew moved with practiced stealth, a decade of street knowledge guiding their every step. Robin, perched on a rooftop across the street, adjusted the scope on her rifle, her breath controlled, her target locked. Salvador. He was always flashy, always loud, swaggering in and out of the pool hall like he owned the place. Tonight, he did, but not for long. Hazel, with Ghost and 2 others, watched from a dark alleyway, their faces obscured by the shadows, their weapons ready. The 2 women, Viper and a quiet operative named Maya, were positioned to block escape routes, rigged with small, strategically placed charges that would cause enough chaos to ensure maximum impact. The tension was a living thing, a coil winding tighter and tighter in Hazel's gut. This wasn't just a hit. This was a statement, the first stone thrown in a war she intended to win. Chapter 5. Blood on the Pavement. The first shots ripped through the night, not from Hazel's crew, but a diversionary volley near the other end of the block, designed to draw attention, to create panic. As Red Shooters spilled out of the pool hall, disoriented and shouting, Hazel gave the signal. Now. Robin's shot was clean, precise. The crack of the rifle cut through the urban din. Salvador, mid-stride, his arrogant grin still plastered on his face, staggered. A crimson bloom appeared on his chest, spreading rapidly. His eyes widened in disbelief, then horror, before he crumpled to the pavement, a dead weight. Simultaneously, Viper's charges detonated, blowing out a section of the pool hall's wall, sending debris flying and plunging the street into a momentary haze of dust and screams. Hazel and her crew burst from the alley, a storm of gunfire. They weren't there to hold ground, just to sow chaos and death. The Red Shooters, caught off guard, returned fire, but it was desperate, uncoordinated. Men fell. Shouts of pain mingled with the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons. Hazel moved like a spectre, her pistol spitting fire, her eyes scanning, searching for familiar faces. It was over in minutes. A whirlwind of violence. They melted back into the shadows as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind a scene of carnage. But as they retreated, Peter, a young, shrewd Red Shooter, just 22, ducked behind a dumpster, his eyes wide with terror. He saw her, Hazel. He saw her grim face illuminated for a split second by a muzzle flash before she vanished into the night. Chapter 6. The Whispers of Vengeance. The safe house was a dilapidated warehouse on the industrial outskirts, far from their initial staging ground. The air inside was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Robin sat cleaning her rifle, a faint smile playing on her lips. Salvador, she murmured, a note of satisfaction in her voice. He always was a loudmouth. Hazel felt a grim satisfaction. 2. 1 down. The architect of her misery. But it was fleeting. She knew this was just the beginning. Meanwhile, back at the shot-up pool hall, chaos reigned. Sirens wailed in the distance. Larry, his face a mask of furious disbelief, knelt beside Salvador's cooling body. His most reliable enforcer, gone. Who did this? Larry roared, his voice raw with grief and rage. Peter, still shaking, emerged from his hiding spot. It was Hazel, boss, he stammered, his eyes wide. I saw her. Her crew. They hit us hard. Larry's blood ran cold. Hazel. He'd thought she was buried, forgotten in prison. The injustice of her framing had been a convenient fiction, a necessary evil. Now, that evil had risen from the grave, armed and dangerous. She's back, Larry snarled, his eyes burning with a vengeful fire. She's coming for all of us. The Red Shooters, still reeling from the unexpected assault, now had a new, terrifying focus for their hatred. The war wasn't just on. It was personal, and the death toll had just begun its relentless climb. Part 3. The Escalation. Chapter 7. No quarter given. The city held its breath. The silence, after the first strike, was unnerving, like the calm before a hurricane. Both sides were regrouping, licking their wounds, preparing. Larry, a man of brutal efficiency, put out bounties, sent out feelers, his network buzzing with a desperate energy. He wanted Hazel's head. Hazel, however, was already planning the next move. She knew Larry would expect a period of quiet. She wouldn't give it to him. This time, they hit a Red Shooter drug house, a well-fortified building rumored to be a stash for their entire operation. Hazel wanted to cripple them, to send a message that would echo through every dark alleyway in the city, we are coming for everything. The attack was more brutal, more coordinated than the last. Viper's explosives brought down a section of the wall, creating an entry point. Robin provided cover fire from a nearby rooftop, picking off lookouts. Hazel and her 8 men stormed inside, their weapons barking, leaving no doubt about their intent. The shootout was a cacophony of shattering glass, splintering wood, and desperate screams. The Red Shooters inside fought fiercely, cornered, but Hazel's crew was relentless. She saw faces she recognized from her past life, men she'd once shared a laugh or a drink with. Now, they were just targets. When the dust settled, the drug house was a ruin. A dozen Red Shooters lay dead, their bodies sprawled amidst overturned furniture and spilled narcotics. Hazel's crew had taken casualties too. 2 of her men were down, 1 critically wounded, the other dead. The death toll was rising, spreading beyond the enemy lines, starting to consume her own. Chapter 8. Larry's Retaliation. Larry was losing sleep. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. Every shadow seemed to hold Hazel's ghost. The second hit, so soon after the first, had been a devastating blow. His ranks were thinning. Fear was spreading through his crew. He poured all his resources, all his informant networks, into finding Hazel. He tortured low-level associates, squeezed rival gangs for information, and beat the streets himself, a desperate predator. It was Peter, still haunted by the sight of Hazel, who provided the crucial lead. He'd followed a hunch, traced a supply run, and found it, a nondescript warehouse on the city's forgotten docks. The signs were subtle: fresh tire tracks, a specific brand of energy drink cans, a glimpse of Robin's distinctive tattoo on a shadowed figure. Larry didn't hesitate. He gathered every man and woman he had left, a grim, determined force. Tonight, he told them, his voice low and menacing, we cut the head off this snake. Chapter 9. The Grinding War. The warehouse became a battlefield. Larry's crew swarmed the building, a furious wave of vengeance. Hazel's team, though outnumbered, had the advantage of prepared defenses, pre-positioned firing lanes, and a chilling resolve. The shootout was protracted, brutal, and utterly without mercy. Gunfire echoed off the corrugated metal walls. punctuated by the roar of explosions and the screams of the wounded. This wasn't a quick strike. It was a siege, a desperate, grinding war of attrition. Hazel fought with a cold fury, her movements fluid and deadly. Robin covered her, her rifle precise, unflinching. But the red shooters kept coming, wave after wave, fueled by desperation and Larry's unyielding command. Hours passed, blurring into a nightmare of smoke and blood. Hazel watched, helpless, as her carefully assembled crew was picked apart. Ghost, so silent and deadly, fell protecting a flank. Viper, her explosives gone, went down in a hail of bullets. The two women, Maya and Robin, fought like demons, but they were vastly outnumbered. By dawn, the warehouse was a charnel house. Larry's forces had been decimated, but Hazel's had fared even worse. Of her initial 8 men and 2 women, only Robin and Maya remained, both wounded, exhausted, but alive. The death toll had risen exponentially. The floor was slick with blood, the air heavy with the stench of death. Hazel surveyed the wreckage, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She had inflicted damage, certainly. But the cost was staggering. Chapter 10. Replacements. The following days were a blur of pain, grief, and relentless planning. Hazel moved herself and her 2 remaining women to a smaller, more secure hideout. Robin tended to their wounds, her usual quiet demeanor replaced by a haunted silence. Maya, always pragmatic, began scouting for new recruits. Hazel knew she couldn't stop. Not now, not when so many had died for her revenge. She had sacrificed too much. She went back to her money, digging deeper into her reserves. This time, her recruitment choices were less meticulous. She needed warm bodies, quickly. She found 8 new men, younger, greener, some clearly driven by desperation for the money, others by a thirst for quick violence. They lacked the experience, the hardened edge of her first crew. They were cannon fodder, and Hazel knew it. The thought sickened her, but she pushed it down. This war demanded sacrifice. Larry, too, had been busy. He'd bolstered his ranks with new, unproven faces. His network was fractured, his authority challenged, but the core of his rage remained. He still had men, still had weapons, and he still wanted Hazel dead. The city braced itself, knowing another storm was brewing. The death toll, it seemed, was nowhere near its peak. Part 4. The Inevitable End. Chapter 11. The Last Stand. The new recruits were eager, but clumsy. Inexperienced. Hazel tried to drill them, to instill discipline, but there wasn't enough time. Larry was closing in. The next shootout was a street ambush, swift and brutal. Larry had used intelligence, cornering Hazel's new crew in a narrow alleyway. The red shooters, though also diminished, held the advantage of surprise and desperate ferocity. It was a massacre. The 8 new men, barely initiated into the violent world of Hazel's revenge, fell quickly. They weren't tested soldiers. They were lambs to the slaughter. Shots rained down from rooftops, from darkened doorways. Hazel fought like a cornered animal, Robin a blur of motion beside her, Maya providing covering fire. But it was futile. When the last of the new recruits crumpled, leaving only Hazel, Robin, and Maya standing amidst the bodies, Larry emerged from the shadows, his face grim, his eyes burning with a triumph that tasted like ash. He had won the round, but at immense cost. The death toll on both sides was staggering, a monument to their mutual destruction. Hazel, bleeding from a graze on her arm, knew it was over. Her war, her crusade, had consumed everything. She had no more men, no more resources to draw upon. Only 2 women stood with her, loyal to the bitter end. And the red shooters, though depleted, were still a force. Chapter 12. A Moment of False Peace. Days later, the city was quiet. An eerie calm had settled, the kind that follows a brutal storm. Hazel, Robin, and Maya, exhausted and perpetually on edge, found themselves at a small, unassuming restaurant on the outskirts of red shooter territory. It wasn't a strategic move, just a hunger-driven need for something other than canned goods. The place was a greasy spoon, the kind of establishment where the coffee was always strong and the conversations were always low. Hazel sat in a booth, her back to the wall, her eyes scanning the room, a habit ingrained by years of paranoia. Robin sat opposite her, quiet and watchful. Maya, surprisingly, was laughing softly at something on her phone, a moment of fragile normalcy in a life defined by chaos. For a fleeting moment, as the warmth of the coffee seeped into her and the smell of fried onions filled the air, Hazel almost allowed herself to feel it, peace. A dangerous, tempting illusion. Chapter 13. The Final Reckoning. Larry, however, was still hunting. His instincts, sharpened by loss and vengeance, were unerring. A low-level informant, desperate for drug money, had tipped him off. Hazel, at a restaurant. Exposed, vulnerable. Larry gathered the last of his loyalists. 10 men, hardened and desperate. This was it, the final confrontation. The restaurant door burst open with a crash, shattering the fragile calm. Larry stood framed in the doorway, his eyes locking onto Hazel. Behind him, his men fanned out, weapons raised. Hazel, Larry's voice was a low growl, filled with years of hatred and the weight of the shared bloody history. Time to die. Shots rang out instantly. The restaurant erupted into a maelstrom of gunfire, screams, and shattering crockery. Tables overturned, chair legs splintered. Hazel, Robin, and Maya reacted with the ingrained speed of survivors, drawing their hidden weapons. Hazel returned fire, her movements precise, deadly, even as her body screamed from exhaustion. Robin, always the sharpshooter, aimed for heads, dropping 2 of Larry's men before they could get a clear shot. Maya, nimble and fierce, darted between tables, laying down suppressing fire. But they were outnumbered, outflanked, and utterly spent. A bullet ripped through Robin's chest, sending her sprawling, her lifeblood staining the checkered floor. Hazel cried out her name, a raw, primal sound, even as she kept firing. Then, a volley of shots tore through Maya, throwing her against the wall like a ragdoll. Hazel was alone. Larry advanced, his pistol steady. "You shouldn't have come back, Hazel," he said, his voice devoid of triumph, only a grim inevitability. This was always how it had to end. Hazel raised her pistol, defiance blazing in her eyes even as her vision blurred. A single shot echoed through the shattered restaurant. Then another, and another. Hazel crumpled. Her last breath hitched, a faint whisper of smoke and regret, as her body hit the linoleum floor next to Robin and Maya. The death toll was complete. Chapter 14. The Bitter End. Larry and his remaining men, their faces streaked with blood and sweat, stood amidst the carnage. The restaurant was a wreck, littered with bodies and the metallic tang of fresh blood. They had won. Hazel was dead, but the victory felt hollow, a bitter ash in their mouths. "Let's move," Larry barked, his voice hoarse, pulling his men towards the back exit. They needed to disappear, to melt back into the city's shadows before the sirens arrived. But it was too late. The wail of police sirens, growing louder and more insistent, cut through the night. The relentless gunfire had finally drawn the attention of the authorities. As Larry and his men burst out the back door, they were met by a phalanx of flashing lights, armed officers, and the shouts of, "Freeze! Police!" Larry stared, his face a mask of disbelief and utter defeat. He had survived Hazel, but not the consequences of the war they had waged. The Red Shooter gang, dwindled to its last 10 members, was surrounded, out of options. Larry, the architect of so much death, the man who had ordered the hit on Tiago and framed Hazel, was cuffed, his reign of terror brought to a definitive, albeit bloody, end. The death toll had indeed risen, consuming nearly everyone involved. The streets were quiet now, the balance of power shifted, but at a cost that etched itself deep into the very fabric of the city. Justice, in its own twisted way, had finally arrived, leaving behind only the cold silence of a war concluded, and the chilling memory of all who had fallen. The end. Story by Kayode Ike.